They can hear me, Hector? Okay, I'm going to assume that you can. We're going to begin Mincha. Shabbat Shalom, everyone who's here in the field. Mincha and the Lev Shalem begins on page 214. Do you remember the pages, Joey? 226 if you're going with a Slim Shalom at home, and in the 550s in the Sim Shalom. Let me see if I have it here. It might be like 554 or something in the one volume Sim Shalom. And again, if you're here, 214. Ashrei Ashrei Veitecha Hojalu Chasela Ashrem Shekachalo Ashrem Sharonai Elohav Tehila LeDavid Armichayim Barashim. Tilatanai daber pi vivarech basar shingochol olam vahe v'nachnu nvarech ya v'yatav olam hallelujah v'al tzion goel l'shavei feshev Yaakov niu Adonai v'nizot briti yotam amaran ruch yesher lechud b'yisher tadapi v'yata kadosh yoshev tilot Yisrael v'karazel zev yamar kadosh 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 Adonai tzmoch al haaretz kevodo mekablin demi demi amrin kadosh b'shmeim roma kiddush be Vatisaini ruach va'eshma charai kol rash gadol barog v'Adonai mimkomo v'lani rucha shemid patrai kal siyasem Adonai imloch leolam voed Baruch hu Eloheinu shebaranu lichvodu v'dilanu minato minatan lan todat emet v'chayom tadotenu V'yivtechu v'chayodei shemecha ki lo azavto dorshecha Adonai Adonai chafetz l'man tzidko yagdil Torah v'yadir. Please rise yitkadav yitkadash shemei rabbah Yamad yirach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yomechon u'chayedechol beit Yisrael v'agalav izman kariv yimeru amen Yehi shemer b'amvorach Elamei almaya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitparchum v'yitnasei v'tadav v'talev v'talal shv'nei kodesha b'richu Nalam yikol brachata v'shirata d'u'shav v'nechmata damiran be'amav yimeru amen V'ani tefilati l'chadonai ratzon l'him barov chastecha anenim b'yamed yishecha. Joey, you want to open the ark? Vayhi ben so Aharon vayomer Moshe kum Adonai v'futzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha ki mitzion teitei Torah udvar nam Yerushalayim baruch shenatan Torah l'moshe b'kedushato. ככל בשמיים ובארץ, אחד נעים המלאכה מנסה לכל הראש, רממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו לו, דם רגליו קדושו, רממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו, כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו. We read Parshat Lech Lecha. It's the beginning of chapter 12 in the book of Breshit, so we'll announce the page from the Eitz Chaim Chumash in just a moment. But if you have any Bible, any Chumash at home, chapter 12. There are no Chumashim? Hmm. Okay, sorry about that. For those of you at home, we just had to grab chumashim that were not in front of us. If someone can yell out the page for the beginning of Lech Lecha. ותגלה ותראה מלכותו, אלינו בזמן קרוב, יכון פליטתנו, פליטתנו, בית שלכן לחסר רחמים לרצון ונאמר אמן. הכל הבו גודל, הננו כבוד לתורה, תעמוד. Deborah, take the first aliyah. Page 69 in the Eitz Chaim. תעמוד. דבור בת דוד ולינדה, עלייה ראשונה ברוך שנתן תורה למשה בקדושתו, ואתם מדבקים למכם, חיים גולכם היום. Where did Marshall go? Wasn't he reading?
I think he went to get a
Chumash? Oh, okay. Here's this.
We're good. We're good. You went the long way.
Let's see, I had my.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bacharanu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et torato. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Vayomer Adonai el Avraham lech lecha le'artzecha mimulatecha mibeit avicha el haaretz asher areka ve'escha l'goy gadol va'avarechecha. What's it? Va'avarecha v'agadla shemecha ve'yeh b'racha ve'avarecha mevarechecha u'kalalecha or v'nivuchu v'cha u'mishkota adama.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam natav tochenu. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Vayelech Avram, kasher diber elav Adonai, vayelech itolot, v'Avram ben chamesh shanim v'shivim shana, yitzeto mecharan, vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto, v'et ben achiv, v'et kol rechusham asher rachashu, v'et hanefesh asher asu v'charan, vayetzu, lalechet arza Canaan, vayaba'u arza Canaan, Ve'avor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom shechem ad elon moreh v'aknani az ba'aretz vayira Adonai el Avram vayomer lizarecha etena ta'aretz hazot vayiven sham mizbeach l'Adonai hanira elav vayatek misham Hahara Mikedem, Levet El Vayet Aholo, Beit El Miyamo I Mikeden, Vayvem Sham Mizbeach Adonai, Adonai Vaikra Vishem Adonai, Vayisa Avram Halok Ben Asoa Hanegba.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Yamod. Wait till you get closer so I can hear you. Gershon ben Moshe v'Shoshana. Oh yeah. We're on page 72, verse 10, last line.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach Le'olam Ba'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Ba'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher Baruch Rabbana Mikol Hamim V'Natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen.
Vayira'av ha'aretz, vayered Avram Mitzrayim al Gursham, ki chaved hara'av ha'aretz, vayi kasher hikriv lavo Mitzrayma, vayomer el Sarai ishto, hinena yadati ki shayafat mare'at, v'haya kire otach ha'mitzrim v'yamru ishto zot, v'haragu otiv yotach yichayu, imreina achoti at leman yitav liva avarech, v'chayta nafshi biglalech. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam natan betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Who's going to lift? I can lift it. Does he lift it? Okay, good. I'll back you.
Oh, okay. Everybody's being a cheer for me first.
Definitely.
Oh, okay. Move the mic out of the way first.
והוא ישב אחרי. זאת התורה
אשר
משה לפני בני ישראל,
אדוני
ביד משה. עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכי המאושר. עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכי המאושר. וכל נתיבותיה שלום, דרכיה דרכי נועם, וכל נתיבותיה שלום, יא ענאי 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 איי 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 איי. Tonight begins the yahrzeit of my paternal grandmother, so I'll say an El Malei Rachamim for her. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utohorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Lenishmat Saftati, הרבנית יהודית בן שמחה לב, שהלכה לעולמה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אנא הבעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרכים את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה. וינוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. And my father is joining us on Zoom. Abba, do you want to share a memory of Safta? You can't unzoom? Unmute? Okay. I'll share a brief memory that Yehudit, my Safta, Julie, is after whom my son Lev is named. Lev's name is Lev Yehuda. She was the only one of my grandparents who was born in Eastern Europe. She was born in Latvia/Lithuania and moved to the States in the late 1920s. Her father was ordained at the great yeshiva in Panovich, whose building I had a chance to visit when I went to Lithuania in 1994. She rebelled against his ultra-Orthodoxy and married a Reform Zionist rabbi and produced a family that helped produce me. And she was a devoted mother and Safta. She put bananas in the freezer as treats for us so that we could come to her house, and we thought a frozen banana was the absolute greatest treat in the world. She would pinch my cheeks until it hurt, and she had a sense of humor that was not always obvious, but was impish in its own way. And she was my first grandparent to pass away, and I'll never forget her. Yehi zichra baruch. Does anybody else have a yortzeit this week that needs mentioning? Shoshana bat Forha. El male rachamim, shochen bamromim, amse menucha nechona, tachat kanfei השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מהסירים, לנשמת שושנה בת פורחה, שהלכה לעולמה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה, אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרכים את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. May your mother's memory be a blessing to you. Anyone else? Daniel? Victor Schmeidler. Is there a Hebrew name? Victor, and a parent's name? Ben Chaim. Okay. Male rachamim, shochen bamromim, hamse menucha nechona, tachat kanfei השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מהזהירים, לנשמת ויקטור בן חיים, שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור צרכים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Dan, do you want to share a memory of your father that's coming to you right now? For those listening on Zoom, Dan mentioned that his father was born before the war, the 1930s, came to Palestine, lost a lot of his family, and saw the end of his life as an opportunity to reunite with those who had passed away. Yehi zichro baruch, may his memory be a blessing. Okay, we'll continue in the Lev Shalem, page 221. In the Slim Shalom, it's in the, remember where? It's in the, it should be just where you had been for the beginning of Shabbat Mincha. Should be a few pages after that. I'm sorry, I don't have those pages in front of me. 560s or something in the one volume Sim Shalom. Ya'alu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodot v'shamayim v'yaron karen liyamo, telachol chasidau levnei Yisrael, gro hallelujah leDavid, mizmor l'Adonai ha'aretz v'motev yom. Susharim Rashechem Musahu B'Tchei Olam V'Yavo Melech HaKavod Musa Melech HaKavod Anai Tzvodu Melech HaKavod Selav Nucho Yomar Shuv Adonai. Terached Archenu Abachol Netiboteh Shalom Ashivenu Nalech V'Nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah V'mad Yivrach Yutei V'amlich Malchutei B'chayechon V'yomechon V'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael B'galav B'zman Kariv Yimeru Amen Yehi Shemer B'Mvorach Le'olam Le'omei Almaya Yitbarach Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpar Shemam V'yinaseh V'tadav V'talev V'talal Shemei Kedusha B'richu V'lam Regor B'chata V'shir Ata T'v'chat Havanechem Ata Damiran Be'alma V'yimeru Amen. The Amidah said in a silent whisper beginning on the next page. If you're still davening, please continue at your own pace. We're going to begin the repetition on the Lev Shalem 223. We remain standing through the Kedusha on 225. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu v'lo Eloheinu lo Avraham lo Yitzchak lo Yaakov el Hagdol Hagibor v'Yano Ra Elyon Gumel Chasadim Tovim Meponei Hakol v'Zocher Chashtei Avod v'Yigoel Evnei V'Nehan Laman Shemo B'Yahava Melech Ozer Moshe u'Magen Baruch ata Adonai Magen Avraham Tagibor Le'olam Adonai Mechei Metim Atarav Lo Hoshia Mashiva Ruach Amir Dagashem Mechokel Chaim B'Chesed בחיי מתים רחמים רבים, שמח נופלים רופא חולים עתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מלחמוך בלגבר דוד המלך, מלך ממית ומחיים מצמיח ישוע ונאמנתו לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. נקדש שמך בעולם כשם שמעתי שמותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב ביד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר Kadosh, 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 Adonai Yitzvah, Melech Haaretz, Kibudul Matam Baruch Yameru. Baruch Adonai Mikmo Derei Kodshecha Katu Lemor. Imloch Adonai Lelam Lo Hayetziel Nador Vador Aliyah Lador Vador Nagid Golech Lenetat Zachim Kedushatcha Nagdish V'Shivchacha Eloheinu. Pino Lemosh Leolam V'Ed Kimelach Kadosh V'Kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. אתה אחד ושמך אחד ומי כעמך ישראל ומי כעמך ישראל גוי אחד בארץ תפארת גדולה ועטרת ישועה יום מנוחה וקדושה לעמך נתת יום מנוחה וקדושה לעמך נתת אברהם יגל יצחק ירנן יעקב ובניו ינוחו בו יעקב ובניו ינוחו בו מנוחת אבה ונדבה מנוחת אמת ואמונה מנוחת שלום ושלווה והשקט ובטח מנוחת שלום ושלווה והשקט ובטח מנוחה שלמה שאתה רוצה בה יכירו בניך וידעו כי מלכהם מנוחתם מנוחתם יקדישו את שמך אלוהינו ואלוהינו רוצה מנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך ותחוקנו בתורתך שבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת והנחילנו לאלוהינו באהבה ורצון שבת קודשך ונוחו בך ישראל מקדשי שמך ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת ורצה אדוני אלוהינו ממך ישראל ותפילתם ושבת עבודה בביתך וישראל תהילתם ובתגובה ברצון ותהיל רצון תמיד עבודה ישראל עמך ותחזינה עינינו בשבחת שם ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון מודים אנחנו עכשיו בואו נזרחם הטוב כי לא חלו רחמך מרחם כלו תמה חסדך מעולם קיווינו לך ועל כולם יפרח ותרם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד וכל החיים ידעוך סלע ועלו את שמך באמת על ישועתנו בעזרתנו סלע ברוך אתה אדוני הטוב שמך לכנה להודות שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם כי תמה לך אדון לכל השלום וטוב בעיניך לברך עמך ישוע בכל עת וכל שעה בשלומך ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום צדקתך צדק לעולם ותורך אמת בצדקתך לימד מרום אשר עשית גדולות אלוהים מחמוך צדקתך קרא אל משפטיך תהום רבה אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני יקרא ויקדש מרבה עמד יברך ותהבה מלכותי בחייכון וימיכון וחטאך ובשול בגלל בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמך מבורך לעולם לעולם יברך וישתבח ויתפאר שמו מן הסייף ותדבר ותלך ותלש ונקודשה בריחו למה כל ברכתה ושירתה תודה ונחמתה דמירן ביום ואמרו אמן תקבל עצות הון ובתון וכוי של אגדם עדי ושמי ואמרו אמן יהי שלום רב מן שמי וחיים עלינו וכוי של ואמרו אמן עושה שלום ורמה הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן we rise for עלינו 231 עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל לתת גדולה ליוצר ראשית שלא עשנו גויי הרצות ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגהור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אני אמלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר, וירא אדוני למלך לכל הארץ, ביום ההוא אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. קדישא תום מורנר's קדש, יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ויעמד יברח גרותי, וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם נעמל מיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. So for those who are here in person, we have a light dinner over there. If you want to go, maybe keep distance a little bit as you're taking food, just to be very careful. And those who are staying with us on Zoom, it's going to take about, I would say, 7 or 8 minutes for people to get food, and then we'll do some teaching before we daven Mariv. So please join us if you'd like to grab some food on your own, but we'll be coming back in about 7 or 8 minutes. Marshall.
Here it's
Not
so well. Slips.
There's no way to tighten it.
I know it's a new one.
It's brand new. Not tight enough.
No, it's the thing is.
So for now, let's just.
We'll just
I don't really like to having to do that because it's so beautiful.
Let's move it up a little bit. So. Yeah, it's not. Okay.
For now.
Good enough, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I lost my sister and he lost his wife. So we're in mourning. We finished Shiva last night. And we would have been the seventh day. Within 30 days. So you'll see us. Well, remember the Park Avenue and one of the places was the place. And we're happy. Susan Block, Sasha Esther Moss, Shipra. No. So my husband is here. He's doing the Orthodox with his mother. And she was an Orthodox woman, so tomorrow he needs to go to school. Have you any suggestions? I know you're not open. And then Sunday night as well. No.
Every morning except
So Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Tuesday night, yes. Very impressed. Yes, about a year or two ago, before COVID. Can you go to JTS as well? Good school. Good school. All these great rabbis. Wow.
All right, the source sheet's going around. For those who are joining us on Zoom, the source sheet was sent out in yesterday's Shabbat bulletin. Let's see that Tybal has it. So that's where you can find it. We'll wait just a minute as it's being passed out. Thank you, Deborah. So we'll start a little shiur in Parshat Lech Lecha, where every Lech Lecha shiur should begin with, and that, of course, is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So there's a scene from that movie that stuck with me as a kid, and it comes back to me now. if you remember, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie, that this is the third Indiana Jones installment. And what they're going after is not the Lost Ark, which is the first one, and not some weirdo thing from the second movie, the Temple of Doom, but the chalice that may have belonged to Jesus that is apparently hidden away in some in some cave, and you have to go through several different trials to find it. And Indiana Jones is after it, and the Nazis are after it, because according to the legend, if you drink from it, you have life eternal. And there's a group of people who are like, you can't tell, you don't know if they're the heroes or the enemies. They're trying to stop Indiana Jones from getting it, and Indiana Jones is the hero, so you feel like you need to be against them, but they seem to be so humble and pure in their motivations, even though they're doing anything they can to stop it. And at some point, there's like a encounter between Indiana Jones and one of these representatives. I forgot the name of their group, but the guy says to Indiana Jones in a very earnest tone, right? Because the cup is supposed to represent the glory of Jesus. So the guy says, so Mr. Jones, Dr. Jones, ask yourself, whose glory are you pursuing? His or yours, right? The idea being that this group trying to protect the chalice is trying to protect the glory of Jesus, who to them is the Christ. And you, Indiana Jones, are you after personal glory, or are you after the glory of the sacred? And I think it's actually an interesting question every religious person, every person in general, but certainly every religious person has to ask ourselves. If we ask it too often, we can get so self-conscious, we can talk ourselves out of piety. But there are also times where we puff ourselves up in our religious identity or our national identity, and it's fair to ask ourselves, are we doing this for the glory of God? Are we doing this for the glory of Israel? Or are we doing this for the glory of self? And if we're doing it for the glory of self, maybe that's okay, because that's a human urge. But ought we need at least be a little bit humble and transparent about it? Okay, with that in mind, I want to go back to where this journey all began, which of course is Lech Lecha, and an interesting machloket over the generations as to what is happening the moment that God taps on Avram's shoulder. He's not Avraham yet, and sends him off on this journey. And if you look at the title on the top of this source sheet, the title will make itself evident over the course of the little shiur. The title, Shushan, a rose garden, I should say a rose garden, not a rose garden, and what Aliyah is for. Okay, just for the sake of the people who are on Zoom, I'm going to do all the reading, but if you have questions, please ask them, but I'm just going to read the text. Normally I'd call on people, but I want to make sure everyone can hear on Zoom. So this is the first pasuk that Marshall read a few minutes ago. Vayomer Adonai el Avram. God said to Avram, Lech Lecha, translated 100 different ways. Lech from the verb lalecha, meaning to go, to walk. Lecha, to you, walk to you, take for you, go yourself. It's translated here as go forth. We'll come back to it. It doesn't really matter how you want to translate it. What I want you to focus on is that it seems to be both alliterative, lech lecha, right? It's really, if you take the vowels out, it's lamed chaf. So it's somewhat kind of interestingly redundant. And certainly if you understand simple Hebrew, lech would have been sufficient, go. What is the lecha for? Every single rabbi who's ever lived has tried to answer that question at least once. Okay. Me'artzecha, from your land, from Haran, where he was, in what's now probably Syria. Umi moladetcha, from your birthplace, from moledet, like Yom Huledet. Umi beit avicha, from the house of your father. El haaretz, to the land, asher ar eka, the land that I will show you. Okay. Rashi famously, on this verse, tries to parse out what the lecha is, right? The verse could have said, Vayomer Adonai el Avram, God said to Avram, Lech me'artzecha, go from your land. What's the lecha? Lecha is built from the preposition lamed, which can mean to or for. The cha ending means you. So Rashi is basically reading this, Lech go lecha, for you, for yourself. Meaning, I'm sending you on a journey, not for my benefit. I don't need this, I'm God. I'm sending you on this journey for your benefit. So Rashi expands lecha to lehana'atcha, for your benefit, uletovatcha, for your own good. And Rashi expands. In what way is sending you from the place that is familiar to a place that is barren and unfamiliar good? Maybe it's good. Avram could say, it's good for you, God, because you get to launch a people, but why is it good for me? Rashi says, I'll tell you why it's good for you in God's eyes. Sham escha lagoy gadol. Avram, here you're a nothing. You're a human. You're anonymous. You're a single person on the planet. But there and only there, escha, I will make you lagoy gadol, into a great nation. You want to put yourself on the map? You want to get a lot of hits on TikTok or Instagram? Follow me. Go to the land of Canaan. That's where it's going to happen. It's not going to happen here. You benefit. Kan iata zochet levanim. You stay here, Avram. Remember all those years you and your wife Sarai have tried to have children. You haven't been able to. That's going to stay. It's going to stay exactly the same. You will not merit children here. You're only going to merit children there. So far, two benefits, right? One, you'll be a numerous people. Two, you'll be able to have children and descendants. And third, the ode, and furthermore, she'odia tivacha ba'olam. That I will make known, odia, from de'ah, meaning knowledge, but in the causative he feel, tivacha, your teva, your nature, your character, ba'olam, in the world. Meaning you're going to become numerous, you're going to be a dad, and you're going to be famous. Here in Haran, you'll be at home, you'll be comfortable, but you'll be childless, you will have no clan, and no one will ever have heard of you. It's actually an interesting question, which one we would choose, right? Not that question would ever be posed to us directly, and people might answer it quite differently. There's some people who prefer to have a quiet life without the burden of raising children and no one caring what they do. There are certain days where that sounds quite lovely, right? But the human urge is to propagate for the most part, and the human urge is to be a person of some renown, and the human urge is to leave a mark, a numerical mark, that there's more of us, of my family, of my seed when I'm gone than when I arrived. So Rashi says, Avram, this is for your benefit. Comes about 500 years later, 600 years later, the commentary called the Siftei Chachamim, literally the lips of the sages, written by Rabbi Shabtai ben Yosef Bass, 17th, 18th century Poland. And he basically does an expansion of Rashi's expansion. This is going to be a little bit repetitive. So he's quoting Rashi, where when Rashi says, V'sham escha lagoy gadol, there I'm going to make you a great nation, Avram, Rotze lomar. What does this mean? Rotze de Rashi ka'ai aleel, shepiresh lahanatcha letovarcha. When Rashi says, I'm going to make you a great nation, that is modifying the phrase that this is going to be for your benefit and for your own good. Ve'alzeh piresh, and on that he commented, Mahi hatova, what is so good about where I'm being sent, or where I'm sending you? She'eselacha shesham escha lagoy gadol. That there is the place where I'm going to make you a great nation. Umahu hahana'a, and what is the benefit? She'odia tivacha ba'olam. That I'm going to make your character known throughout the world. One second, I'm not sure I want to do this, the rest of this passage. Yeah, we can leave that there. So the Siftei Chachamim basically makes it quite clear that Rashi's understanding is that the making of a name great and the making of a family populous and the making of a character known is to your benefit. Okay, if we stop here and we follow this line of thinking, Aliyah, even though geographically it's Yerida, right? He's starting from the north and he's coming down south, but we always think of going to the land of Israel, whatever geographical compass point we're coming from, as an Aliyah, right? The reason why Avram makes Aliyah, as it were, to Israel is for what purpose? What? To create a great nation and for his own good, right? That we are sent on this journey towards Israel because through Israel we will become bright and through Israel we'll become blessed for our glory. God does not say, I'm sending you there so you can make my name great. The opposite, right? I'm sending you there so that I can make your name great. It's kind of the inverse of the religious thrust. The religious thrust you would think would be that I will, when the Mormons go on the mission, they're going not to make them famous as a missionary. They're going to make Jesus famous as the one being missionaried about, right? But the beginning of this journey, according to this line of thinking, is not so that God's name will be great, but that Avram's name will be great. Okay. Go to the next commentary of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. I found this beautiful teaching by him. I couldn't find the exact citation. I like giving the exact citation of a text, but I couldn't find it in this case. He's commenting on Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mi moladetcha. Yesh b'nei Adam. There are some human beings. Shemit amrim bilibam. Lehit amer is a great Hebrew word. It's built from the word omer, to speak. It's in the hit pa'el reflexive. It's to speak about yourself. It's to boast. Lehit amer means to boast. There are some people who boast bilibam in their hearts. Ki ohavim hem et Eretz Yisrael. Oh, do I love Israel. I love that place. I love the hiking. I love meeting friends I haven't seen since that summer in camp. I love the falafel. I love seeing the rebirth of Jewish sovereignty. Boy, do I love it. V'rotzim la'alot eleha. And they want to go up to it. They want to take a trip. They want to move there. They want to redo Avram's original journey. Ela sherotzim la'alot b'harchava. But how do they want to go? They want to go in expanse, in comfort. They want an air-conditioned bus. They want a beautiful breakfast in the morning at the hotel. They want to make sure that there's always bottled water on every hike. And they want to go and be financially comfortable, right? That old joke, how do you make a small fortune in Israel? Go with a big one, right? They want this aliyah to be comfortable. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav was obviously talking pre-state of Israel, about 150 years, but even then he's talking about whatever Hasidim or Jews he was living near, who they had this fantasy image of going to the land of Israel, and boy, it's going to be great for them there. V'lo b'dachkut, but they don't want to go if it's going to be a source of distress or hard for them. Otsa'ar, or pain. No, they have plenty of pain and distress in Odessa. They don't have to go to the land of Israel for that. They want to go because it's going to be great. Ratzon kozev hu. This is a false desire, Rabbi Nachman is saying. It is a false desire, and in some ways, he's speaking contrary to Rashi's interpretation of Lech Lecha. You don't go to Israel for your benefit. And you don't go to Israel because it's going to be comfortable. And you don't go to Israel because it's going to be fun. That is a false, anti-spiritual desire. Ki mi sherotzeh la'alot la'eretz Yisrael, the one who wishes to ascend to the land of Israel, and again, he's not talking about citizenship or making it, or declaring that they live there, but making a pilgrimage, right? Aliyat regel is a pilgrimage. Sarich lalechet, has to go afilu beregel, even if it takes you there by foot, which, by the way, when Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav was living, was basically how you got to the land of Israel, right? You basically walked from Eastern Europe or went on wagons to get there. You have to go there by foot, ubeyigiyah, and with exertion and strain. Kamosha Hamar Hashem, and Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav finds a proof text for his line of thinking from the very proof text that Rashi used to explain, Avram, this is going to be great for you. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav interprets it, opens it the opposite way. Kamosha Hamar Hashem el Avram Avinu, just as God said to Avram, our father, Lech Lecha, go for yourself. Except that Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav doesn't focus on the yourself, he focuses on the Lech. Lech, walk. Halicha mamash, an actual walking experience. Baregel, using your feet, which are going to get tired and weary and cut up along the way. And now he uses this phrase, which Rabbi Nachman Bratslav uses a lot, and I don't have a great way of translating it because it doesn't have a whole lot of usages in other rabbinic texts. It's a very rare, even though the Hebrew itself is not hard, it's hard to know exactly what he means by it. Betil tulei drachim. I translated it I want you to know, I spent 45 minutes with a chavruta of mine on Friday trying to translate these two words. We went deep into the sources to find it. So I went with the itinerancy of the roads. Tiltul is a word that, when it comes to the halachot of Shabbat, has to do with carrying. You're not allowed to carry on Shabbat if you're not an Eruv. That's considered tiltul. But the root word can also mean migration, and it can also mean burden. So I think what he's saying here is not the carrying, but if you want to get yourself to Israel, it's going to require a real walk. It's going to require weary feet and all of the vicissitudes of the travel. It's not getting on the nonstop at the El Al nonstop and flying in a comfortable seat and being fed 3 meals. And I mean, that's how we get there. But that's not what Aliyah was originally meant to be. It was you had to earn it, right? Remember that old Smith Barney? Was it Smith Barney commercial? We make money the old-fashioned way. We earn it, right? John Houseman, anyone? That great actor? Okay, good. I just don't know if, hello, is this on? So Rabbi Nachman have said, no, when you get there, you'll know that you'll really have earned it, and you'll know that you're not going there for you, even if you're happy when you're there. You're going there for Israel. You're going there for God. This is a really fascinating machloket, which I think is still playing itself out today in modern Zionism. And that goes back to the title of I put on there, Shushan, a rose garden, and what Aliyah is for. Let me give you the Shushan piece, then I'll give you the rose garden piece. My cousin, my grandmother's first cousin, of whom I've spoke several times in this community because he was a huge influence of mine, was really the Zionist patriarch of our family. His name was Dr. Yisrael Eldad Shaib. Grew up in Poland, was best friends with a young man named Menachem Begin. They played sheshbesh and chess as they went baregel on their feet from Poland to Palestine in the 1930s, and hopping on trains and camping out in the middle of the night. And they got there in the 1930s. Begin, according to my cousin, became a lefty and joined the Irgun, and my cousin stayed with the Lehi and was the basically the intellectual force behind the Lehi resistance movement. He wasn't a fighter. He was the author of all the pamphlets, the underground pamphlets, the Machteret. He was a firebrand Zionist, an extremely good man, an extremely wise man, extremely ethical man, and an extremely passionate Zionist. And he had a very interesting interpretation of the Purim holiday, right? In modern Jewish lore, Purim is frivolity, Purim is masks, Purim is Boo Haman and Yay Mordechai, and celebrating this Jewish community's defeat over annihilation. My cousin hated Purim. He hated Purim because he saw the Purim story through the lens of history. And he said, if we historicize the Purim story, it's taking place maybe in the 5th century BCE, somewhere in the 400s. And even if it's entirely fanciful, that's the time where it's emplaced. What's happening in Persia in the 5th century BCE? Well, I'll tell you what's not happening. What's not happening, he says, is forced exile. Forced exile is 586 BCE by the Babylonians. The Jews go off to Babylonia. 70 years al Naharot Bavel, they wept on the water by the waters of Babylon. 70 years later, King Cyrus Korush comes and defeats the Babylonians and basically says to the Jews, you want to go to the land of Israel, go to the land of Israel. And what do some Jews do? They follow Ezra, they go to the land of Israel, they build a second temple. And what do some Jews say? Well, what's in it for me? I speak the language here. I have synagogues here. I have synagogues. I know it's an anachronism. I have a Jewish life here. I'm comfortable here. Is it going to be better for me there? Right? So the origins of some parts of Mizrahi Judaism are from the Jews who didn't make Aliyah in the 5th century, 6th century BCE. They stayed. They stayed and they assimilated. They stayed and they assimilated and they named their children Mordechai, which sounds really like a great Jewish name until you realize it's probably a name for the Babylonian god Marduk. And they named their daughters Esther, which today is a beautiful Jewish name, but it's probably named after the Assyrian fertility god Ashtarti.
and they participated in beauty pageants, and they slept with the pagan king, and they celebrated it. Right? This was his very harsh critique of Shushan. He says Shushan is not my idol. I don't want to spend a day celebrating Shushan. Those Jews should have made Aliyah, he said, not because it would be good for them, because it would have been good for Israel. And had they made Aliyah, there'd be no Haman. There would have been no one to destroy them or threaten to destroy them, because they wouldn't have been Meforaz spread out. They would have been back in the land of Israel where they belong. So as an ardent Zionist, he obviously was a religious person, so he celebrated Purim, but he railed against it because he would have taken Rabbi Nachman of Rashlam's view of Lech Lecha. God did not send Avraham to the land of Israel so that life would be easier. God would send Avraham to the land of Israel because that's where his destiny was. And you Jews of Shushan, and he would say this to the Jews of America, and he said it to me and my parents and my grandparents, what the hell are you doing in Connecticut? What are you doing in New York? What are you doing in Los Angeles? No one's stopping you from going to the land of Israel. Lech lecha me'artzacha. Eventually, kibbutz galiot, the ingathering of the exiles, will actually happen, and you realize that the destiny of the Jew is to be the land of Israel. So I've lived my life since I've learned that from him, both inspired by that and in opposition to it, because I live my life here, right? But there's a piece of me that wonders if the reason I did not make Aliyah when I had opportunities earlier in my life was because it would have been hard. It would have been challenges to overcome that I would not have faced by having to create a life here. And I don't quite feel guilt about it, because I think all of us are doing a beautiful job trying to build a diaspora. Maybe heaviness is a way of saying it, not a guilt. And the rose gardens, as Zionists of a particular ilk may identify with this slogan. My parents have subsequently left the Zoom, but had they been on the Zoom, I could have turned the screen around, because I could see they were sitting in our family room, and on the wall on our family room has been a poster. It's been sitting over the bar for the last 40 years, and it's a poster for the 1970s, and the slogan was, "I never promised you a rose garden." Right? And it's an image of the thorny, hard to produce, grains and flowers piece of Israel, which is basically saying you came back to Palestine to turn it into the land of Israel, not because it was going to be the Riviera, right? Not because your individual life would be beneficial, right? To think about the waves of Aliyah, right? And the ways in which our people were true chalutzim to create the small beginnings of what is today the state of Israel. I'm sure they had individual moments of joy and satisfaction in their life. And I'm sure some of them were coming because life was miserable in the Pale of Settlement and escaping the pogroms. But they were motivated not necessarily or completely by individual personal freedom and joy, but because they felt that the Jewish people had to build a future in the land of Israel. And life was not a rose garden for them, right? Or if it was a rose garden, it was created because of yigia, because of exertion, and because of dochak, because of what the Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says, going through the challenging times. So to bring it back to Indiana Jones, right? We are, modern American Jews for the most part. I presume, although I could always be wrong, that all of us have a identification with Zionism as well, and we love visiting it, and I love visiting it, and it brings me joy to visit, and it brings me a sense of uplift. And I'm humbled by reminding myself of the question that Indiana Jones did not have a good answer to, which is that when I feel a sense of glory, when I'm walking that land, and I'm visiting, and I'm making my own personal aliyah, is the glory that I'm seeking and the glory I'm experiencing my own? Or is the glory that I'm seeking and the glory I'm experiencing the glory of the land itself and what the Jewish people have been able to imperfectly and yet also magnificently build there? And I think that is a worthy question to ask on nearly every religious act. When I bow for the Aleinu, am I bowing in such a way that brings glory to God, that as I show my obeisance and I show my presence, or glory to me as I show everyone how well I know the prayers, right? When I belt out a song in a service, what's the balance between my personal enjoyment of a spiritual high, which is okay because we're not an ascetic tradition, and the actual goal, which is to bring honor to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to the holy, blessed Creator of all of us. So it's a non-resolvable tension, but a tension that I think it is worthy of our being a little more aware of as we go through it, because there are many glories out there within reach. The land, the God, the people, our own, and a balance of them is probably a healthy religious and Zionist stance. So I spoke longer than I expected to, and I didn't stop to ask questions, but it's not because I wasn't interested in people's thoughts. So let me pause here and see if anyone has any comments, questions, or reactions. I kind of got in a roll and didn't stop. Comments, questions, or reactions, either by the Zoomers or by the people in person, because we do have a minute or two. Oh. Tada. Tada. Latus. Right. Well, I would. The question is, does that mean that the next time we go to Israel, we have to take ourselves by foot? Right. Obviously not. It's a metaphor. We can fly, but I do think it's worth at least pondering how we make a trip to Israel not merely a vacation, right? Not merely a joyride. When I take groups to Israel, I want them to have a good time. I do. I want them. I mean, I live in the modern milieu in a capitalist culture. I want them to feel good about the money they spent, and I want them to stay at a nice hotel and feel good about that. And I want them also to have left a mark on the country or on the land, and to experience some sort of selflessness and exertion on behalf of the land. Whether it's spending a day, working for the organization called Leket, which goes to all the fields of the kibbutzim, and they, after the first harvesters go through, they leave plenty of fruits and vegetables in the field that may not be able to be sold at Super Sol, but they are certainly good fruits and vegetables to be given out to people who are indigent. And so Leket comes through and collects tens of thousands of pounds of produce that ends up feeding the hungry that would not have been sold at the A grade in the supermarket, right? That's a way of having of spending some of your time in Israel, realizing that the glory of others and the glory of God is more significant than how good our our shawarma is, or our what do you call it, the limonade, the limonana, which is refreshing at the end of the day. Anyone else? May we all have the merit, the zechut of making our aliyah to Israel sooner rather than later, and may we do it with an awareness of whose glory matters the most. Okay, we'll do Kaddish to Rabbanan, and then we'll do Mariv. We have to bench. Thank you, Joey. So why don't we do this? Why don't you bench while I get some water because I'm thirsty, and then we'll do Kaddish to Rabbanan. Shuva Adonai Eshiviteinu Fiki Banegev Ha Bedima Berina Yiktzum Haloch Yelechu Bacha No Se Mesech Hazara Bo Yavo Verina No Se Alumotav. Joey? Yehi Shemon Amrach Metavi Adolam.
Baruch Eloheinu Shulchan Mishalov Tuvo Chayinu. Eloheinu. Rachamim. Uno Telech Amocho Basar Ki Leolam Chasto. Amin Lo Zalanu Ve'al Yizalanu Mazon Leolam Bo'eva Vorden. Anu Marnes Ago. Obrigotava Servara. Aruhata. Okay, you're finishing benching. We're gonna move to Kaddish Rabbanan. It's on page 111 in the Slim Shalom. Sorry, in the Lev Shalem. Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalma divrach hirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayecho nuvyomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kari v'meru amen Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevorach leolam le'almei maya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal Shemei Kudusha brichu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'meru amen Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidei v'al kol Talmidei Hon v'al kol man da'askin be'oraita di v'atra hadain v'di b'chol atar v'atar Yehei lahon ulchon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin zonar avicha ufor kanamin kodam avohondi v'shmaya v'meru amen Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen Oseh shalom v'ramav u'barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. We'll move to Mariv. Joey, do you want to lead Mariv? Okay. So you do not need a talit. Mariv begins 264 in the Lev Shalem. I think it's 2
100 in the Slim Shalom, and 130 something or 140 something in the Slim Shalom. You can use that mic. Please rise for the Baruch Hu. Rachum, yeah.
Who Rachum Michaper Vili Ashkipi Arbala Hashiva Povil Yair Kolchamato Adonai Hoshia Melchianu Vium Korenu Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamivorach Baruch Adonai Hamivorach Lelam Vaed Ma'avir maybe Lailam of Dilbinim Bain Laila Adonai Tavot Shemo El Chavakayam Tamim Mechlinu Lelam Vaed Baruch Ata Adonai Ma'ari Varavim Avatalam Beach Summer. Yavatechal Tasir Mimenu Lelamim Baruch Ata Adonai Ohevamo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem Emed Ve'menakol Levikalem. Umalchuto Berason Kibilu Alehem Moshe Miriam Uvnei Israel Chanu Shirab Simcha Rabav Yameru Chulam Michamo Chabaylim Adonai Mikamo Chanadar Bakodesh Narate Lo Tosefele Malchutecha Rauva Nechabukayam Mifnei Moshe Zeili Anuv Yameru Adonai Mlo Chulam Vaed Neemar Kivad Adonai Yaakov Ugalo Miad Chazak Mimenu Baruch Ata Adonai Gaal Yisrael Ashivin Adonai Ushmort Seitenu Voinu L'chaim Shalom Me'atavi Adolam Baruch Ata Adonai Shmer Amo Yisrael La'ad Baruch Adonai Olam Mein V'Amein Baruch Adonai Baruch Adonai Bayam Baruch Adonai כי המלכות שלך היא לעולמי עד תימוך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המלך בכבודו, תמיד ימלך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. יתגדל ויקדש שמך רבה, ועל עמה דברי הכירותך ועל מחמחותך, בחייכון ויומכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל, ועל אליו בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמך רבה מברך לעולם לעולמי עולמיה, יתברך וישבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמך קודשה בריחו. לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעל עמה ואמרו אמן.
If you're still davening, please continue at your own pace. Chatzi Kaddish 279 in the Lev Shalem.
Igadal Vigadash Shemeh Rabba.
Amen.
Belamadi Virakir Teh Viamlich Makuteh. Bechayechan Viamechan Vchaydachol Be Israel. Bagalavis Man Karivim Ru.
Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shemer Bam Barach Lamayayid Barach.
Eat Barach Vishabak Parvit Rambi. Nasavit Hadar Vitalevit Halal. Shemeh Tukud Shab
Brichu.
Elamin Kilbrichat Mishirata. Tushbichat Nechamata. Da Amiram Bealemavim Ru. Amen.
Amen. Bihino, middle of 279 in the Lev Shalem. Bihino Marnel Hilel Masedin, Konel Masedin.
Ikraini Venehu Moanuki Vithra Halativa Habidehu, or Chami must be who very Ubishuati, or Chami must be who very Ubishuati.
Back to 216, second paragraph. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Nice one.
Batisani Rachel Veshma Achrai Kolrashka Dol
Baruch
or
Kavod
Kodonai
Anaim Mikuman
Mikumo.
Latrucha she made Patraika.
Anaim Lachalam Vaid. Alright, so what do you mind? Iftichu b'chayode esha mecha kilo azabta doreshecha Adonai Adonai chafetz lamantiko yagdil Torah v'yadir.
Kaddish Shalem, which I guess you can go to 280 in the Lev Shalem.
Ikara v'ikara shemeh rabba.
Amen.
Yalemadi v'rakir teh v'yamich machu teh b'chayechan v'yamechan v'chayel Israel. Bagalav izman karivim ru.
Amen. Yehi Shmer Rabba Mavorach Leolam Leolam Yitbarach.
Barach Yishabach v'parvit ramina sevit hadar v'tal v'tal shemeh kudsha.
Brichu.
Brichu leil amin kol brichata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechamatada miram be'alem avim ru.
Amen.
Tigabal so dun v'tahon d'chol Yisrael kodam v'hon di v'shmei avim ru.
Amen.
Yishalam arabam v'shmei avchayim alim v'kol Yisrael avim ru.
Amen. Amen. We rise for Aleinu 281.
Kakatu b'torta Adonai melchel v'nemar v'haya Adonai melchel ha'aretz b'hem hu yeh Adonai echad shmo echad.
Kadisha Tom, Mourner's Kaddish, page 282.
Eat gadal v'eat kadash shemeh rabba.
Amen.
V'alema divera kiruteh v'amlich machuteh v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala ubizman kariv v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shemeh rabba mevarach le'alam l'lamei l'maya. Eat barach v'ish tabach v'it pa'ar v'it romam v'it naseh v'it hadar v'it alev v'it halal shemecht kudsha berichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata da'amiran v'alema v'imru amen Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen Oseh shalom b'romav Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu Vel Kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen.
Okay, we'll do Havdalah. Come as close as you feel comfortable to come. No one has to come close, but if you want to join close a little bit, you may. Yeshuati, Eftach velo Evchad, Ki Azim Ezim Rabya, Adonai Vayehi Lishua, Ushaftem Mayim Besason, Mimane HaYeshua, Ladonai HaYeshua, Alamcha Birchatecha Selah, Adonai Tzvaot Imanu Miskav Lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah Adonai Tzvaot Ashrei Adam Botei Abba Adonai Yoshia Hamelech Yaneinu V'yom Koreinu La Yehudim Hayta Ora V'simcha v'sason v'yakar kein tiyeh lanu kos Yeshua tesa u'v'shem Adonai yakra Adonai 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech borei pregafen Baruch atah Adonai melech borei minei v'samim Baruch atah Adonai borei miorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Melech Magdil ben Kodesh ben Choshech ben Yisrael ben Yom Hashil Sheish Mehamase. Baruch atah Adonai Hamavdil ben Kodesh lecho. Hamavdil ben Kodesh lecho. Katoteinu imcho. Zareinu b'chaspeinu yarbe kacho kochavim balayla. Zareinu b'chaspeinu yarbe kacho kochavim balayla. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Agila. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Agila. Oy b'meira yavo elinu, Mashiach ben David b'meira yavo elinu, Mashiach ben David. Shavua to everyone. Good vach. Good ruach, Danny. Good ruach. Thank you. I mean, occasionally at Shabbat Mincha, sometimes. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I've gone in and out of what I do. I haven't had a sip of soda in a very long time. Oh, no, it's really good. I didn't know you. Oh, that's amazing. I don't like it at all. Shavua tov for the. It's not